The defense has rested its case in former President Trump's criminal hush money trial. The jury is now leaving the courtroom until next week, with a pre-charge conference happening later this afternoon. This after testimony from Robert Costello, a former lawyer for Rudy Giuliani, who testified that Michael Cohen told him Trump did not know about the hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. I want to bring in our senior reporter, Catherine Falders, along with ABC News legal contributor Brian Buckmeyer for more. Catherine, the jury's now out till next week. So what happens next?
Right. So as you mentioned, later this afternoon, they'll have that charge conference where the judge will debate instructions about how to instruct the jury before deliberations. So that will happen at 2:15. Obviously, the jury won't be in the room for that, but we will see the former president, his lawyers and prosecutors again. And then, look, after that 2:15 conference, they're out for the Memorial Day weekend. They'll come back. Summations will be on Tuesday. I'm not sure that we've gotten an answer yet to whether or not the jury can be in on Wednesday. He says if they can't, I'm just looking at the notes from inside the court because the judge wanted this to be consistent. So Tuesday, they'll do the summation, so closings in the case, potentially work on Wednesday. And then, look, this goes to the jury. The jury will begin deliberating. So in terms of timeline, when the jury begins deliberating, how long that will take, obviously, is unclear. So it's just in their hands. And then, of course, after that, hopefully, Trump, he would say, hopefully, could get back out on the campaign trail.
Brian, what's each side going to try to get out of this pre-charge conference?
So it's really about arguing about where the commas are put and the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. We're talking about instructions like lack of interest or interested witnesses, that falsus in uno, whether you make one false statement and all your statements can be thrown out. And then, of course, the actual charges themselves, the falsification of business records, and what theory the prosecution is putting forward and what language under that theory is going to be used. And so in that, both sides are going to want to get the most favorable interpretation or words that are going to be used so they can kind of fit those factual arguments into the framework that is the law that the judge is going to give to the jury.
Based on what you've heard so far, what are the key points you expect each side to focus on during their closing arguments? Let's start with the prosecution. What do you think they are going to try to really home in on, and what story are they going to try to paint here?
So I think they hone in on how this case came about, their investigation. They're going to start with the catch and kill scheme that started with David Pecker and the conversation that Michael Cohen had with him to kind of create that. The multiple check-ins, as they've tried to point out, that Michael Cohen had with Donald Trump to attach him to this crime, that he is knowledgeable about the workings of Michael Cohen, as well as the payment and reimbursement and how those all occurred. I think another aspect they've got to focus on, because don't forget the order in which these closing arguments happen is the defense goes first and the prosecution goes last. The prosecution has to address many of the pitfalls of their star witness, Michael Cohen, and his credibility. They're going to have to try to rehabilitate that through corroboration, saying that, yes, Cohen has lied here, 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 and here. But on these instances, he is telling the truth because we have the receipts, so to speak. And for the defense, they've got to point at every lie and every reason why you cannot believe Michael Cohen, and that this case rests on his credibility and his recounting of these events. And I think credibility becomes a big point for both sides.
Catherine, what's at stake here for the former president, both legally and also in terms of his campaign and reputation?
Well, legally, if he's found guilty, that could be obviously potential jail time for the former president. Who knows whether that will happen or not. But in terms of the campaign, even if he is found guilty by the jury, of course, Trump's lawyers are obviously expected to appeal any sort of verdict in that sense. So we could probably expect that legally. And as it relates to the campaign, look, I know we've talked a lot about the politics and the legal being blended together. This isn't really going to affect, after the fact, after the trial's over, it's not really going to affect his ability to get back out on the campaign trail and do his rallies and campaign and do his fundraisers. Surely he will appear in other courthouses if there happen to be some hearings or motions hearings or status hearings, though he doesn't need to show up. But he does view his legal woes and his legal dilemmas as part of his political platform at this point. So frankly, he views this as beneficial in some way. Now, I'm curious to see with any verdict, if he is found guilty here, how that ultimately affects the polling politically, how that affects his money flow. We know that some donors have said privately that they won't give money if he is found guilty in any of these cases. So that still is to be determined, Diane.
And Brian, we can't ignore the historic nature of this. A former president has never stood criminal trial. So what does the outcome here do for precedent?
I think it creates a precedent that regardless of what your political affiliation, how you document and how you run your campaign will be evaluated not just by the federal government, but by various state governments as well. We have an election this year. We have two individuals that we think are going to be the presumptive nominees for their respective parties. And I think in terms of precedents, what we're going to see is whether you're in New York, Iowa, California, Texas, now state prosecutors will look at how these filings are done and how they're documented. And I think we're going to see greater investigations or better scrutiny of political candidates and how they run from the federal all the way down to the state level.
Catherine, what are you watching for next in these proceedings?
Look, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be in the hands of the jury soon. So if there's any more theatrics from the Trump side, I don't really think that they have much room to do any of that. So the question is, how long do they deliberate? There's all sorts of tea leaves when reading the jury, as Brian knows all too well. If they deliberate an hour later, they come back with a verdict. That's probably not a good thing for Trump. But you know, who knows? They only need one juror for a hung jury. And frankly, at this rate, the Trump lawyers view that at least as a win.
They now are out of court until next week. So what do you expect from the campaign on that front? Will former President Trump take advantage to hit the campaign trail? And what's their messaging going to be until then?
Yeah, I think he will take advantage of it in some ways, and their messaging will be similar to what we've seen throughout the trial and their fundraising efforts, if you will, and those emails that we get that he's being unlawfully persecuted and prosecuted. He blames this on Joe Biden, even though there's no evidence of that in any way as it relates to this case. So I can assure you we will see a lot more of that. We will see his political allies definitely appearing on the airwaves. I'm sure they're doing that currently or maybe soon outside the courthouse. All of those advisors you see him behind there who have shown up to court with him. I think we'll see a lot of that. And frankly, I do think he'll take advantage of this. Trump will in some ways between now and then. It is the Memorial Day long weekend, but he will have some campaign events as well.
All right, Catherine Falders, Brian Buckmeyer, thank you both.